The living body has the remarkable ability to make copies of itself. In fact, it's one of the human body's most important tasks, and it can dominate a woman's most creative years. Over 9 months, a woman's body can assemble a steady supply of basic ingredients into a living, breathing, moving human being. Sally here has just conceived a child and will be following the growth of that new life in her body until it's ready to emerge into the world. Today, deep inside her body is a fertilized egg, no larger than a pinhead. As the embryo develops, Sally will feel a mixture of excitement and discomfort as she tries to live a normal life with a growing human being inside her. The setting for the remarkable events that will happen in Sally's body is her womb, a small pear-shaped organ linked by the fallopian tubes to her 2 ovaries. After intercourse, sperm from her partner finds its way through the womb and into the fallopian tubes. 1 ovary each month releases an egg, and at some point on its journey down the tube, the egg meets the sperm. This tiny cell now contains the blueprint to build a whole new body, half from the father and half from the mother. The egg divides into 2 after a few hours, and then once or twice a day, each of the cells divides again into 2, and then 2 more, to produce a blob of 100 or so cells within 4 or 5 days. While it's growing, the ball of cells is also traveling down the fallopian tube and into the womb. Here, the cells are ready to settle down and start in earnest the complex and mysterious process that produces a living child out of a clump of identical cells. The light patch in the center is the cluster of cells that will become the embryo. Around it are cells that will become the placenta, a life support system for the embryo as it attaches itself to the wall of the womb. Cells on the outside help to burrow into the wall of the womb, where they can pick up food from the mother's cells. This will nourish the embryo as it starts to take shape inside. This is the crucial stage of pregnancy, called implantation. If something goes wrong with these carefully coordinated events, the embryo fails to get a foothold in the womb, and the woman may never even know she'd conceived. In Sally's body, the developing cells have implanted successfully. A week after conception, a process has started that will change Sally's shape and produce a most extraordinary series of events inside her over the next 40 weeks or so. These contour photographs show Sally's body at each stage of her pregnancy. One of the first effects of implantation is to start the building of a comfortable home in the womb for the developing embryo. Usually, the pink lining of the womb, seen here around the entrance from the fallopian tube, thickens each month, ready for a fertilized egg to appear. If implantation doesn't happen, the lining is shed in the woman's monthly periods. But a successful pregnancy releases hormones which stop the menstrual period. The first that Sally knew of the momentous events going on inside her body was when the period she expected this month didn't appear. By this stage, her developing child is already made up of thousands of cells. One of the most mysterious processes of life is the way in which a few cells grow and multiply to become a complex living creature.
In the early stages, humans and other mammals develop in the same way, head first. This is a mouse embryo, with the brain forming first, and then the spinal cord, followed by the forelimbs and the beating heart. At the 3-week stage, Sally's baby is still only the size of a grain of rice. Like these human embryos during the first month of life, Sally's tiny cluster of cells contains the beginnings of most of its organs and systems ranged along the curve of the spinal cord. Sally's embryo has already come a long way from one fertilized egg. But there's a lot further to go before these few cells become the skin and bone, brain and muscle of an adult human. Somehow each cell in the developing body knows what it has to become. A hair cell, or a light receptor in the eye. A cell in the lining of the nose, or on the surface of the lips. And cells also have to know where to develop. A toe on the end of a foot, for example. During life in the womb, each generation of new cells in the embryo follows a series of instructions, a design for a 3-dimensional shape. Like Sally knitting a sweater, the instructions are just a list of things to be done in a certain order. You can't really tell by looking at a knitting pattern what the wool will turn into. The pattern is written in a code which only makes sense when it's seen as a series of instructions to be carried out in a certain order. As long as the pattern is followed correctly, a complicated and well-organized shape will emerge from a single shapeless strand of wool. The pattern for Sally's baby is contained in each of the cells of her embryo. Every cell has a collection of 46 chromosomes, packaged instructions for building a baby. Any one developing cell will only use a small part of the total information. A nerve cell may consult sections of these chromosomes. A bone cell will use entirely different parts of the same set of instructions. It's really like having a whole book of patterns in our chromosomes, with thousands of pages containing instructions for the many different types of cells the body needs. A chromosome is a long coil of DNA, the molecule that carries the genetic instructions. The coil unwinds inside our living cells, revealing a pattern that contains all the information you need to assemble a baby. A month or so after conception, the embryo looks like this. Its shape changes from day to day, developing folds and bumps that will eventually become whole organs or limbs. This is a living human embryo filmed in its mother's womb. At this stage, it's still smaller than a fingernail. The details of the embryo are blurred by the thin membrane that surrounds it, the amnion, containing amniotic fluid. The lighter streak across the screen marks the beginnings of a spinal cord running along the embryo's back and up to a larger clump of cells that will make up the brain and the rest of the head. This flat, paddle-like object will become an arm. And here, little more than a pulsing tube at the moment, is the earliest appearance of a human heart.
Sally is now 6 weeks pregnant, and she knows it for certain. The growing embryo is producing hormones which show up in her urine and confirm to her doctor that she's pregnant. Between a month, the age of the embryo we just saw, and 6 weeks, the age of this embryo, human development makes amazing progress. The eyes have started developing now, and so have the ears. The regularly beating heart has developed a more complex shape. This twisted tube is part of the gut, and this stump will eventually turn into a leg. The hands are further advanced and show early signs of fingers. Sally is now 8 weeks pregnant. The baby she conceived in the spring is going through its most strenuous period of growth as summer arrives. Her body has to supply the baby's increasing need for food and oxygen. At 2 months, the baby is this size in Sally's womb. Now it graduates from being called an embryo to a fetus. These remarkable views show how the fetus has become recognizably human in many ways. It's at this stage that it starts its first small movements, although Sally won't feel anything for at least 2 more months. All the main parts of the body have formed now, but the top half is more developed than the bottom half, and so the hands are more advanced than the legs and feet. You can't yet tell the sex of Sally's child by looking at the genitals. At the moment, there's a sort of indeterminate ridge that could go either way, but the sex was actually determined at conception, and every cell in the fetus holds the secret. For Sally, the 3rd month of pregnancy brings constant reminders that there's a lot going on inside her body. To provide the best conditions for the growing fetus, many different organs and systems collaborate under the control of several important hormones that circulate in her blood. And most important of all, many changes take place in her womb, as it'll have to increase about 20 times in weight. The most important hormones are produced at first in the ovaries. Progesterone, for example, travels in the circulation to the breasts and increases the size of the milk-producing cells. At the same time, estrogen enlarges the ducts that'll carry the milk to the nipple. The womb expands under the influence of estrogen and progesterone. As the fetus develops, so too does its life support system, the placenta, which also secretes hormones to take over some of the jobs performed up to now by the mother. Because hormones travel all over the body, they can have troublesome side effects on many different areas. They may cause morning sickness, for example, and produce discomfort and tenderness in the breasts as they prepare them for breastfeeding. The progesterone that relaxes the muscles in the walls of the womb can also influence other similar types of muscle elsewhere. It can affect the stomach muscle and produce heartburn, and it can relax the ducts that lead to the bladder, making kidney infection more likely. Lower down, there's a similar type of muscle in the veins of the legs. If progesterone causes them to slacken, it can lead to the varicose veins that affect some women in pregnancy. The only consolation in all this is that these hormones are vital for the womb and its contents to develop successfully. And it's getting increasingly cramped in here as the fetus shares the available space with the placenta, a much neglected part of childbirth. This complex mushroom-shaped organ has been growing side by side with the fetus since the earliest stages of pregnancy. It has an intricate blood supply that links the circulations of mother and fetus, but keeps them separate. The placenta is attached to the wall of the womb. It acts as a filter, letting through useful substances from the mother's circulation and allowing them to flow down the umbilical cord into the fetus. This is the only connection between the fetus and the outside world. All its daily needs come as a steady traffic along these blood